Never mistake silence for stupidity. Sometimes it's the sound of intelligence taking notes. Chosen one, let's get real for a second. They underestimated you. For years, they looked at your calm face and quiet nature and assumed you were clueless, lost, or easily manipulated. They laughed when you didn't fight back, rolled their eyes when you didn't explain yourself, and whispered that you were too nice to survive. But here's the truth they can't handle. You were never naive. You were calculating. You were watching them play checkers while you were designing a chessboard. You saw every fake smile, every hidden agenda, every small act of cruelty disguised as a joke. They thought they were getting away with it, but you were collecting mental screenshots the whole time. You knew when to step back, when to play dumb, and when to stay quiet, because silence was your shield and your weapon. The smartest ones rarely need to prove it. And now the universe is rearranging things to show them just how dangerously intelligent you truly are. Before we go deeper, chosen one, if you feel this message pulling at something real inside you, press that like button and subscribe. That's how you send energy back into this mission. How you remind the world that intelligence doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just moves in silence. Now, let's go back to that silence for a moment, the kind that comes after a storm. Notice how people have changed lately, how they act cautious around you, how their tone softens, how their jokes don't land anymore. That's not respect. It's fear disguised as politeness. They're realizing that the one they mocked now sees straight through them. You're not the same person they thought they could manipulate. You've studied their patterns, learned their weaknesses, and evolved quietly while they exposed themselves publicly. Let's make it clear, intelligence isn't about knowing every fact or quoting big words. It's about emotional accuracy, reading energy before it even speaks. You sensed when someone's compliment was laced with envy. You recognized fake opportunities that were really traps. You noticed when someone tried to copy your style but couldn't replicate your originality. And still, you said nothing. That's what haunts them most. Your silence. They can't figure out what you know or when you'll use it. There's a study by the University of Rochester that found intelligent people often mask their abilities to avoid social tension. That's you. You dimmed your light just to keep the peace. But deep down, your mind was running simulations, connecting dots others couldn't even see. When they laughed, you learned. When they plotted, you prepared. And when they finally thought they'd broken you, you walked away with your dignity intact. And all their secrets memorized. Think of every time they tried to embarrass you, twist your words, or take credit for your work. Every one of those moments was a clue, a lesson, a warning. You didn't react because you knew something they didn't. Time always exposes fools. And now, the silence they mocked has turned into the echo of their own regret. You see, the universe has a strange way of rewarding those who don't rush to prove themselves. The ones who observe quietly are always the ones who end up running the show later. Remember the story of Albert Einstein. He barely spoke as a child. Teachers thought he had learning issues, but while others were chasing attention, he was busy shaping the theories that would change human history. That's what you've been doing, building in the background, mastering your lane, preparing for a comeback so sharp it'll slice through every lie they built about you. And now, here you stand, in the aftermath of every betrayal and misunderstanding, stronger, smarter, and more precise than ever. The quiet kid became the strategist. The underestimated one became the threat. And those who thought you were easy to fool? They're the ones who look foolish now, watching your moves in silence, wondering how you learned so much without ever saying a word. Chosen one, your intelligence isn't just mental, it's spiritual warfare disguised as calmness. You've learned that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It only reveals itself when it's time to collect what it's owed. And your time has arrived. And hey, chosen one, yeah, I'm talking to you. You've been quiet long enough, haven't you? You've watched people underestimate you, play mind games, and still walk away thinking they were smarter. But deep down, you always knew who was really taking notes. This is your moment to see it all from a higher angle, to understand why your silence was never weakness. It was strategy. So before we go deeper into the layers of your brilliance, drop a comment below with the number 777 if you're ready to finally own your intelligence and stop shrinking to make others comfortable. And stay right here, because if you're truly one of the chosen ones, you'll feel it in your bones. You'll know this message was meant for you. The deeper we go, the more everything will start making sense. So take a breath, sit back, and keep your eyes right here. Because by the end of this, you won't just see how intelligent you are, you'll understand why they were never ready to face someone like you. Now, let's dive in step by step. Number 1. They measured you wrong. Now they're terrified by what you really see. They thought you were quiet because you didn't know. Truth is, you were quiet because you already knew too much. Let's be brutally honest. Your intelligence scared them before they even had the words to admit it. But instead of facing that fear, they called you slow. Instead of respecting your silence, they mocked it. And instead of trying to understand your mind, they tried to define it with their shallow standards. That's the game they played, judging you based on how many facts you could spit out or how quickly you answered a question, as if true intelligence was just a circus act for applause. But here's the plot twist. They got it all wrong. They were measuring memorization. You were mastering perception. And perception, that's the kind of intelligence that doesn't just know things, it sees through them. You've never been interested in performing like a puppet. That's why they overlooked you. They mistook your silence for ignorance and your calmness for confusion. But they had no idea you were doing mental surveillance the whole time. While they were bragging about surface-level knowledge, you were peeling back the layers, reading tone, watching body language, hearing the lie behind the laugh. And now they're rattled. Because perception is a threat. It can't be manipulated, distracted, or dressed up. It exposes what people work hard to hide. You ever wonder why they acted uncomfortable around you? Why they talked too much, laughed too loud, or kept trying to explain things you never asked about? It wasn't confidence, it was fear. Fear that you saw straight through them. And you did. Because chosen one, your mind doesn't work like the crowd. You don't just accept what you're told. You strip it down, break it apart, and ask the dangerous question no one else dares to. What's the real reason behind this? That question alone makes people sweat. Most of the world lives on borrowed thoughts. They repeat whatever sounds popular. But you process. You walk into a room and feel the energy shift before anyone says a word. You notice the fake smiles, the subtle jabs, the way someone's eyes dodge the truth. That's not guesswork. That's perceptual intelligence. And it scares people who've built their whole life on illusions. They can't manipulate someone who sees too clearly. And they hate that they can't control you. You were never slow. You were scanning. You weren't lost. You were decoding. Every moment they thought you were zoning out, you were actually zooming in, catching patterns, tracking inconsistencies, and building a mental archive of everything they hoped you'd miss. You were storing spiritual data in silence while they performed for approval. And now, the receipts are loaded, the patterns are exposed, and the mask they wore so confidently, you already knew it didn't fit. It's funny how they used to talk down to you, isn't it? As if your intelligence had to look like theirs to be valid. But that's because they only understand intelligence they can measure. What they can't measure, they fear. They thought you were behind. In reality, you were beyond. You weren't playing their game. You were watching it from above, documenting, analyzing, waiting for the moment when it would all collapse under the weight of its own lies. Let's be clear, perception is a higher form of intelligence because it's rooted in awareness, not performance. And awareness is dangerous in a world built on distractions. You see the lie in the handshake, the motive behind the compliment, the trap hidden inside the opportunity. They don't like that, because the more you see, the harder it becomes for them to use you. And that's why they tried so hard to paint you as weak, because they couldn't handle your strength. You ever felt that sting of being treated like the dumb one, even though your gut told you what was really going on? That's because you've always had a sixth sense for truth. You didn't need proof. You felt it. And now you realize you weren't crazy. You were correct. That intuition was data. That gut feeling was code. And the things you sensed back then are being confirmed right now, one by one, in front of your eyes. That's the beautiful revenge, chosen one. You didn't need to clap back or prove yourself. You just stayed true to what you knew. And the universe, it kept receipts. It saw who lied on your name, who underestimated your mind, who whispered behind your back. And now, the very people who thought they had you figured out are scrambling to catch up, because you're no longer hiding how sharp you are. You're just getting started. Perception-based intelligence is quiet. It's surgical. It doesn't need an audience to perform. It just needs a pattern to break. And now, you're breaking every pattern they use to control you. You're seeing people for who they really are. You're not getting lost in the noise. You're listening to what's beneath it. And that's terrifying for people who thrive in manipulation. You're no longer reacting to distractions. You're responding with precision. And the silence they laughed at. It's become the sound of power shifting. You were never built to fit into a system designed for obedience. That's why you never felt seen in school, in work, or in social groups. They were teaching how to repeat. You were born to rewire. That's what true intelligence looks like. It doesn't regurgitate, it reprograms. And now you're reprogramming your reality. You're shifting from the underestimated to the undeniable. Let them talk. Let them wonder how you know so much without saying much. Let them get uncomfortable when your eyes land on theirs, because what they're really afraid of is that you saw everything. You saw their intentions. You caught their lies, and you never even raised your voice. That's the kind of intelligence you can't teach, and it's the kind they'll never understand. So let them keep chasing applause. Let them keep performing for approval. While they run in circles, you're going to walk through doors they didn't even know existed, because you saw the exit plan before they even realized they were in a trap. That's perception. That's power. That's you, the chosen one. And now they're finally realizing what you knew all along. They never had you figured out. They just couldn't see past their own ego. But now that your intelligence is unfolding in plain sight, all they can do is stare. You were the blueprint the whole time. They just weren't smart enough to recognize it until now. Number 2. They worshipped the system. You exposed its lies. Real intelligence is not how well you repeat what you've been taught. It's how boldly you question what everyone else accepts. The classroom never made you smart. Your rebellion did. They studied to pass exams. You studied human nature. They got A's in the system. You got answers from the universe. Let's break this down with no filter. They thought you were behind because you didn't beg for a seat at their academic table. They thought you were lazy because you weren't chasing gold stars or teacher validation. But here's the truth. They were so trapped in the system, they couldn't even imagine a mind that existed outside of it. You weren't trapped in the education system. They were. You saw through the smoke and mirrors long before anyone gave you permission to question it, and that terrified them. From the beginning, something didn't sit right with you, did it? You saw the pattern, the repetition, the way every question had only one approved answer, even when you knew there were deeper truths. You noticed how the system praised obedience, not originality. And even as a kid, you sensed something wrong in your bones. This wasn't intelligence. They were training performers, not thinkers. They told you to sit still and memorize while your mind was racing through the why. They told you to raise your hand and wait to speak, but your thoughts were already 5 steps ahead. They gave you textbooks filled with facts, but your heart knew those facts didn't tell the full story. You weren't defiant for the sake of rebellion. You were awake in a room full of sleepers. Imagine this. You're in a classroom and the teacher announces a test. Everyone else scrambles to memorize the chapter. You sit quietly, not because you didn't study, but because you already understand what they're pretending to teach. You don't need to cram because you see the deeper patterns, the why, not just the what. That's the difference. They think being intelligent means reciting information. You know that true intelligence means asking the uncomfortable questions that expose what they've been avoiding. They were so proud of their straight A's, their perfect attendance, their Student of the Month awards. But deep down, you weren't jealous, you were disturbed, because they didn't realize the system wasn't just teaching them facts, it was conditioning their minds. While they were polishing their resumes, you were sharpening your vision. You were watching how the system fed them scripts and how they swallowed them whole without ever asking, who wrote this script? And why? You ever wonder why people got so uncomfortable when you questioned things in school? Why teachers seemed annoyed by your curiosity? It wasn't because your questions were wrong, it was because your mind was too free. You were pulling threads they didn't want unraveled. You were shaking the foundation of a system built to keep people quiet, compliant, and easy to manage. And they didn't know how to handle that. Picture it like this. Most people are raised in cages and taught to call the bars education. They decorate those bars with degrees and titles, never realizing they've just been trained to stay inside. But you were the one pacing at the edge of the cage, testing the lock, searching for the door. You weren't trying to escape knowledge, you were trying to escape the lie. That's what they'll never admit. You didn't reject learning, you rejected limitation. You didn't hate school, you hated being told how to think. And when you refused to worship the structure, they called you lazy, rebellious, or unfocused. But in reality, you were focused on something far greater: truth. You knew even then that intelligence couldn't be stamped with a degree or confined to a classroom. And here's the kicker. They memorized their way into the system and now walk around thinking they're better than you. But hand them a real-life problem that doesn't have 4 multiple-choice answers, and they freeze. Because the system never taught them how to think, it just taught them how to comply. You, on the other hand, can walk into chaos and find clarity. That's not just intelligence, that's leadership. That's vision. Let's answer what's probably in your mind right now. Was it wrong to walk away from the path everyone else followed? No. In fact, it was the smartest move you ever made, because that path wasn't designed to lead to freedom. It was designed to loop you back into serving a system that rewards silence and punishes original thought. You were never meant to be a cog. You were meant to be the one who rewrites the blueprint. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't need credentials to validate their brilliance. You make them insecure, chosen one, not because you're arrogant, but because you're unbought. You've trained yourself through real life, through trial and error, through watching people, reading energy, studying failure, and trusting your own analysis. You built your intelligence like a scientist in a private lab, not for display, but for survival. Imagine someone spending 20 years chasing certificates only to realize one day that a dropout just outthought them in a boardroom. That's the energy you bring. You're the proof that the system can't define who wins anymore. And that scares the hell out of people who bet their worth on paper achievements. They hide behind their GPAs and job titles, but you walk in with clarity, with conviction, with the kind of mind that doesn't need permission to be powerful. You don't just know facts, you know how people move, how energy shifts, how intentions feel. That's an education no classroom can offer. That's wisdom born in the wild. They still don't get it. They think because you don't use big words or flaunt your achievements, you must not have any. But the truth is, you've learned to understand, not to impress. And that makes you unpredictable, uncontrollable, and yes, unstoppable. The education system gave them a script. They followed it line by line. You tore it apart and rewrote it in your own handwriting. And now every room you walk into is a reminder that the system might build resumes, but it can't build you. So let them keep clinging to their framed diplomas like they prove something eternal. Let them keep mistaking obedience for genius. You know better. You are better, because you didn't just pass the test. They never even saw the real test you were taking. And now they're waking up to the uncomfortable truth. You were never behind. You were just busy escaping the trap they're still stuck in. Number 3, you tear through their lies like paper in a storm. A manipulator's worst nightmare isn't exposure. It's someone who can see through them before they even speak. You don't just listen to words, you weigh them. They were busy building masks. You were busy reading the shadows behind them. Let's call it what it is. You're a lie detector wrapped in human form. What truly disturbed them wasn't just your knowledge, it was your vision, your ability to catch inconsistencies faster than they could cover them. They thought you'd fall for the same tricks that worked on everyone else. Flashy words, rehearsed sincerity, emotional traps. But you saw the glitch in their performance before the show even started. You dismantled deception the way a skilled hacker breaks through weak code, fast, quiet, and precise. While others are still getting caught in the storyline, you're already 5 layers deep, pulling the threads apart. Why? Because you don't just hear what people say, you study what they really mean. You watch tone, timing, body language, energy shifts. And the second something feels off, your mind flags it. Instantly. People often ask themselves, why do I always fall for lies? But you've asked a different question your whole life. What are they trying to hide beneath this smile? That shift alone changed your destiny. Because where most people crave comfort, you crave clarity. And manipulators? They hate that. They hate how you don't give them the performance they were hoping for. They hate how one simple sentence from you can puncture their illusion. You don't expose people with drama, you expose them with accuracy. Sometimes you don't even have to speak. Your silence is the pressure that makes their mask crack. One raised eyebrow from you says more than an entire courtroom. Because your energy doesn't just sense lies, it burns through them. They thought they could run the same games on you that worked on the naive and approval-hungry. But you were never buying it. You were taking notes, storing inconsistencies like a human archive. So when they finally tried to twist reality around you, you calmly unfolded the entire script, exposing every false sentence they ever said. That's why they fear your intelligence, not because you argue louder, but because your truth is louder than their entire act. Number 4. You think in 5D, they can barely handle 1D. Linear minds fear what they can't follow, and your thoughts move like lightning through mazes they didn't even know existed. While they connect dots, you draw constellations. They think in checkers. You operate like chess, quantum physics, and poetry all at once. You weren't being confusing, they were just unequipped to process the way you see. Let's get something straight. Your intelligence doesn't move in straight lines. It expands, it weaves, it bends around corners and sees through walls. And that's what rattles them. They live in a cause and effect world. One action, one reaction. Nice and predictable. But your mind, it operates across dimensions they can't even define, let alone understand. You don't just respond to life. You read it, feel it, forecast it. And they hate how often you're right without proof, because you're not guessing. You're processing what they're not even equipped to perceive. Most people need a clear roadmap before they move. You already know where the turns are, even if no one has drawn the map yet. That's not luck. That's multidimensional intelligence. You're not just analyzing facts. You're decoding emotions, history, hidden energy, and unspoken patterns all at once. And when you speak your truth, they stare at you like you've skipped steps. No, you skipped illusions. You took the shortcut through the truth while they were still tracing the surface. Imagine this: two people looking at the same room. One sees furniture, the other sees the tension in the air, the story behind every object, the energy shifts between people who haven't said a word yet. That second person, that's you. They can't keep up with you not because you're too complex, but because their minds are too confined. They've been taught to follow logic like a train on a track. But you're flying above the tracks, seeing every route at once. You're anticipating moves before they're even conceived. That's why your warnings sound prophetic. Your decisions feel sudden, and your presence makes people nervous. You see through people before they act. You read motives that haven't even been spoken yet. And let's be honest, it's not that you're hard to understand, it's that they've never learned how to think in more than one direction at a time. Your mind isn't a flashlight, it's a satellite. It doesn't point, it scans. It doesn't follow trails, it detects patterns. And that's why your intelligence is not only advanced, it's untouchable. Number 5. You weren't playing their game, you were watching it burn. They wanted you to solve their puzzles, not realizing you'd already decoded the magician's trick. Real intelligence isn't solving traps, it's refusing to step into them. They built mazes to keep you running, you built wings and flew over them. Here's the raw truth they can't stand. You were never the student in their little tests. You were the observer. For years, they tried to convince you that your value was tied to how well you could handle their chaos. Every challenge they gave you was really a leash, designed to measure how obedient you were. They thought if you played along and solved their problems, you were smart. And if you refused, you were rebellious. But they were wrong. You were not a contestant in their game. You were the quiet architect of your own path. While they cheered themselves on for tricking you, you were already seeing the bigger picture. You noticed the setup, the drama they created, the traps they disguised as tests, the endless distractions meant to keep you reactive instead of creative. Most people waste their lives proving themselves inside other people's mazes. You didn't. You realized early on that the smartest move isn't running faster, it's stepping off the track completely. Imagine this: someone hands you a box full of tangled wires and says, "If you can untangle this, you're smart." Everyone else starts tugging, pulling, and fighting the knots. You look at the box and say, "Why am I even holding this?" and walk away. That's you. That's real intelligence. It's not proving you can play their game. It's recognizing the game for what it is, a distraction. And that's when everything shifted. The moment you stopped scrambling to impress them, their control began to crack. You didn't argue, you didn't over-explain, you just observed, stayed calm, and let their illusions collapse under their own weight. That's brilliance. That's power. They called you resistant. In reality, you were aware. You flipped the script so completely that what they meant as a test became a mirror reflecting their own insecurity. You weren't defiant, you were untouchable, because your intelligence isn't about solving their problems. It's about instantly recognizing which problems aren't even yours to solve, and that terrifies them. Number 6. You don't just see what they do, you know why they did it. The smartest minds don't chase the action, they trace the intention. They can fake behavior, but motive? That's the one thing they can't camouflage. You weren't overthinking, you were overhearing the truth behind their silence. Let's cut through the noise. Anyone can point out what someone did. But you go for the why. That's what separates your intelligence from the crowd. You don't get caught up in the performance. You zoom straight to the script they're hoping no one reads. While others are reacting to behavior, you're already scanning the motive that triggered it. And once you understand someone's why, their entire illusion loses power. That's what makes you so dangerous. Most people accept what they see. They take actions at face value, but not you. You ask, why now? Why this tone? What's missing here? You watch what they say and what they don't. You don't just hear their words. You read their energy, their pacing, their hesitation. That kind of insight isn't something a school can teach. It's built through experience, through betrayal, through time spent in rooms where masks outnumbered faces. Imagine someone complimenting you with a smile, but their voice trembles, their eye twitches, their timing is off. Others would smile back. You'd tilt your head slightly and make a mental note. That wasn't praise. That was a warning wrapped in sugar. That's how your mind works. You're not paranoid. You're perceptive. You know that behind every action is a reason, and behind every reason is either alignment or agenda. They hate that about you. They hate how hard it is to fool you. They rely on surface-level thinking, quick judgments, and people being too distracted to question anything deeper. But you're a motive hunter. You don't accuse, you understand. And that understanding alone shifts the entire balance of power. The truth is, people can hide facts, bend stories, or perform innocence. But motive leaks through everything, and once you catch it, once you see why they did what they did, there's no going back. You don't even need to confront them. Your awareness alone destroys the game, because real intelligence doesn't react. It recognizes, it reveals, and once your mind locks in on the truth, every mask begins to crack. Number 7. You weaponized silence. Now every word feels like a bullet. Silence isn't the absence of thought, it's the sharpening of it. They ran their mouths, trying to look smart. You sat still and became dangerous. Your quiet didn't mean you didn't notice. It meant you noticed everything. Let's clear this up once and for all. Your silence was never weakness. It was precision. It was patience. It was a strategy they couldn't decode. While they thought they were talking over you, you were studying them. Every smirk, every contradiction, every micro-expression, they were performing for applause, and you were the one taking notes in the back row. That's what rattles them now. They thought they had the upper hand, but the one who listens longest strikes with the most impact. They assumed that because you weren't loud, you weren't aware, that because you didn't rush to speak, you had nothing to say. But here's what they never understood. Real intelligence doesn't interrupt. It observes. You weren't ignoring them. You were reading them. Like a lie detector with perfect memory. Your silence was never passive. It was your most active, focused state of being. Imagine this. Two people in a room. One is talking non-stop, trying to dominate the space. The other is watching, still, calm, calculating. Everyone assumes the loud one is in control until the quiet one speaks. And that one sentence flips the entire dynamic. That's you. You don't speak often, but when you do, you end conversations. You don't argue, you expose. They call your silence awkward because it unnerves them. People don't know what to do with someone who isn't begging to be heard. But that's the point. Silence is power, and you mastered it like a sword. When you don't fill the space, others start revealing themselves. They ramble, they over-justify, they try too hard. And all the while, you're gathering intel. By the time you respond, you already know more than they'd ever admit. They mistook your quiet nature for someone who could be ignored, but now they flinch at the sound of your voice. Not because it's loud, but because it's accurate. Every word you say lands with weight because it comes from a place of clarity, not ego. You never needed noise to be powerful. You needed space. And once you had it, you turned silence into strategy, and that made you unstoppable. Number 8. You didn't just survive. You learned the blueprint while bleeding. They broke you open, thinking you'd shatter. But all they did was give you a clearer view. You didn't come out of the fire damaged. You came out designed. They thought you'd be emotional. You came back engineered. Here's the truth they never expected you to live long enough to tell. Every ounce of pain they threw your way only made you smarter. They thought they were tearing you down, but you were quietly taking notes. While others allowed suffering to define their limits, you treated it like training. Every betrayal, every breakdown, every situation that tried to bury you became data. Not just emotional memory, strategic insight. That's why you walk different now, not just with strength, but with clarity. See, most people get hit by life and collapse. You got hit and started studying the impact. You noticed how betrayal always comes wrapped in false flattery. You recognized how people behave when they think you need them. You watched entire systems fall apart under stress and saw exactly where they cracked. That's not just survival, that's surgical awareness. Imagine being trapped in a storm with nothing but your instincts, and instead of panicking, you chart the weather pattern, build a mental shelter, and prepare for the next strike. That's you. They think you're calm because you're numb. But no, you're measured. Because when you've been hurt enough times, your brain stops asking, "Why me?" and starts asking, "What's the pattern?" They call it intuition, but what you really have is battle-tested pattern recognition. You don't just feel when something's off, you know it because you've seen the setup before. That's why you don't waste time on drama or distraction. You don't get baited into emotional chaos. You pause, calculate, then move, like someone who's already survived the explosion and now knows where every wire is hidden. You didn't just heal, you translated pain into precision, and now your energy is unreadable to those who haven't suffered enough to understand strategy. They think you're lucky. No, you're designed, engineered by hard lessons no teacher could offer. So the next time they wonder why you're always 10 steps ahead, tell them this: I wasn't just surviving, I was studying, and now I build my future with blueprints they tried to destroy me with. Number 9. You don't hunt truth, it finds you first. While they run after answers, you stand still, and the truth comes walking. Your mind doesn't chase, it calls, and knowledge obeys. They're wired for memory. You're wired for meaning. Most people are in a constant sprint, chasing the next idea, the next theory, the next trick to appear smart. But you're different. You don't run after information like it's a finish line. You attract it like gravity. You don't just learn, you recognize. That's why people around you seem confused by how quickly you get things. To them, it's a struggle. To you, it's alignment. You ever wonder why strangers say something random that suddenly unlocks a deep truth in your mind? Or how a single sentence in a movie hits you like it was written just for you? That's not coincidence. That's your mind already prepared to receive. You're not just listening, you're tuned in. You don't need to search far because the answers find you where you are. Others chase facts. They stuff their heads with data, hoping it sticks. You, on the other hand, move through the world with antennas up, ready to catch meaning in everything. A fleeting moment, a subtle pattern, a shift in energy. It all speaks to you. Why? Because your intelligence isn't based on storage, it's based on structure. Your mind knows how to hold and filter what matters, so it naturally attracts what others miss. Imagine someone running around with a net trying to catch butterflies, sweating, frustrated, chaotic. Meanwhile, you sit in the garden you designed, and the butterflies come to you. That's the power of preparation. You built a mind that truth feels safe to land in. People say, "How do you know that?" And the honest answer, you don't know how you know. You just do, because you don't memorize to survive. You absorb to evolve. While they memorize empty quotes, you hear one truth and apply it to your entire life. That's intelligence in motion. You're not a collector of random knowledge. You're a magnet for wisdom that matters. You don't need to chase it because you already built the inner space where it belongs. That's not luck. That's intentional. That's you. And it's why people are always a few steps behind, trying to figure out how you saw what they couldn't even sense. Number 10. You don't shout for truth. You trigger it with one silent strike. You don't need a sword to end the battle. Just the right question at the right time. They built lies like castles. You asked one question and watched it all collapse like dust. Most people argue to be right. You ask to reveal, and that's what makes you lethal. Let's make this crystal clear. Your power isn't in how much you say, it's in what you ask. While others waste their breath trying to debate, defend, or drag the truth out of people, you stay calm, and then land one surgical question that turns their whole story inside out. That's not luck. That's precision. That's high-level intelligence in action. And it scares the hell out of those who build their lives on illusion. You don't confront people with aggression. You confront them with clarity. That's why they fumble when you speak. One question from you creates panic because it bypasses the script. It targets the inconsistency. It tears right through the performance and demands a real answer. And most of the time, they don't have one. Because your question didn't come from confusion, it came from deep understanding. Imagine someone performing a well-rehearsed lie in front of an audience, fully confident, until you ask, if that's true, then why did you? And just like that, the whole thing unravels. The room shifts, they stall. Because that one line from you wasn't just a question, it was a spotlight. And under that light, truth has nowhere to hide. This isn't about being clever. This is about being trained. You've watched human behavior long enough to know which threads are fake. You see patterns before they form. You know when someone's selling a story instead of telling one. That's why people get nervous when you go quiet. They know you're processing. And when you finally speak, it's not emotional, it's exact. They call it intuition, but it's really years of silently observing lies. It's learning where people twitch, where stories crack, where the timelines don't line up. You don't guess, you know. You don't interrogate, you expose. One well-placed question from you doesn't just shake the room, it ends the performance. It forces people to either stand in their truth or run from it. And either way, the illusion dies. That's why your intelligence isn't just respected, it's feared. Number 11. You didn't beg for a spotlight. You became the fire they now circle. They wanted trophies. You built truth. While they were busy trying to be seen, you were busy becoming undeniable. They trained for applause. You trained for accuracy. That's why they still chase the light you already are. Let's get one thing straight. You didn't need them to tell you who you were. You already knew. That's what separated you from the beginning. While everyone else was hustling for approval, shaping themselves to be liked, chasing grades, job titles, and applause, you chose a different path. You stayed quiet. You stayed grounded. And in that solitude, you became unshakable. See, the world taught them that intelligence was a performance. Smile, recite, get rewarded. You didn't play that game. You weren't learning to impress. You were learning to understand. You weren't performing to be praised. You were evolving to become. And that's why you passed them without even realizing it. While they were stuck waiting for someone to clap, you were building something no one could take away. Self-sourced intelligence. Imagine a runner who never looks at the crowd, just the finish line. That's you. You didn't care about the noise, the rankings, or the gold stars. You were focused on mastering your craft, expanding your mind, and staying true to your vision. That's why your growth looks effortless now, because it wasn't built for the stage. It was built in silence, behind closed doors, while they were distracted by spotlights. And now, the irony is brutal. They're looking at you for validation, the very one they ignored, the one they once doubted. They want your attention, your respect, your stamp of approval. But the truth is, you never needed theirs. And that's what makes you so powerful. You moved without permission. You excelled without applause. And now your intelligence doesn't just shine, it shakes rooms. They measured intelligence by how many people noticed. You measured it by how much you knew. That's why you're not only ahead, you're in a league they can't even find. You didn't just reject their system, you evolved past it. And in doing so, you became the very thing they'll spend their lives chasing, but never catching. Number 12. You don't watch people, you decode their operating system. People lie, patterns don't. You don't need confessions. Their behavior already told you everything. Others see moments, you see blueprints. Let's be real. Your intelligence doesn't rely on instinct. It's built on observation, not random guessing, not emotion-driven hunches, but cold, clean, consistent pattern recognition. You don't just see people, you read them. You don't chase their words, you track their rhythms. While most get distracted by the moment, you're quietly analyzing the loop, the repeated choices, the subtle shifts, the exact triggers. You're not reacting, you're recording. That's why your presence feels surgical. People get nervous around you, and they don't know why. It's not because you're loud, it's because you're accurate. You don't need anyone to tell you who they are. You already saw the truth in how they behaved the last 5 times they thought no one noticed. You're not interested in what they say, you're watching what they repeat. Imagine someone playing poker, bluffing with confidence. Everyone else is fooled, except you, because you've already noted their twitch, their breathing pattern, the way they glance left when they lie. That's how your mind works. Pattern over performance. You let them act, you let them speak, then you file it, connect it, and by the time they try the same trick again, you already know their next move. They call it intuition because they can't explain it. But it's not mystical, it's mechanical. You watch, you analyze, you wait. That's why your foresight cuts so deep, while everyone else is shocked by betrayal or failure. You saw it coming 3 chapters ago. You've already played this scene in your head 100 times. You don't study people to be entertained. You study them to understand the architecture of their behavior, their patterns, their defaults, their telltale signs. That's why you stay calm while others lose control. You know what's next, because you've already seen the setup in motion. You don't guess outcomes, you recognize them, and that's why your intelligence doesn't just feel sharp, it feels almost supernatural. But it isn't magic, it's mastery. Mastery of pattern, mastery of psychology, mastery of yourself. And in a reactive world full of blind spots and impulsive minds, that kind of intelligence is nearly untouchable. Number 13. You don't chase time, you command it. They react to what's in front of them. You calculate what's coming. Time bends for the prepared. And you were already 3 moves ahead before they even noticed the game started. They treat life like a stopwatch. You treat it like a chess clock. You don't live in the moment just to survive it. You navigate it with vision. That's what separates you from the masses. Your relationship with time isn't frantic, it's strategic. While they're scrambling to fix what's on fire, you're calmly adjusting the thermostat before anything overheats. Because you don't just experience time, you understand its rhythm. And once you grasp that, you can predict almost everything. People often misread this gift. They think you're cold, detached, or somehow too calm. But the truth is, you're not reacting because you've already factored it in. While they live day to day, you see the cause and effect chain playing out like dominoes in slow motion. They think you're lucky when things fall into place. But what they don't realize is, you placed the pieces when they weren't looking. Imagine a storm hitting a town. Most people run in panic, grabbing what they can. You boarded up the windows 2 days ago. You stocked your supplies. You made peace with the winds. And now, while they're spinning in chaos, you're steady because your mind doesn't panic. It prepares. That's why so many are caught off guard by your consistency. You don't scramble for success. You position yourself for it. You don't chase timing. You align with it. And because of that, what feels like intuition is really the product of foresight. You've trained your mind to zoom out, to see how the present moment links to the future. So you move slowly when it's time to conserve. You move fast when the path is open, and they never see it coming. You're not trapped by urgency, you're governed by clarity. While others get swallowed by the moment, you walk it like a timeline you already studied. And that's why your intelligence feels otherworldly. It's not because you know everything, It's because you respect when everything happens and use that knowledge like a master tactician. In a world where most people let time whip them around like leaves in a storm, you've become the one who moves with the wind, but never gets carried away by it. That's not just intelligence, that's control.